And the answer is that you must always turn to the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the answer to all questions in the Holy Quran. So let's examine Yajuj and Majuj in the Holy Quran. Yajuj and Majuj are mentioned in the Holy Quran twice. The first mention is in Surah Al-Kahf, the second mention in Surah Anbiya. Surah Al-Kahf tells us about the history and the origin of Yajuj and Majuj, where they've come from. Surah Anbiya tells us about the emergence and rise of Yajuj and Majuj, where they're going. So these are the two key surahs that we must study in order to understand the truth of Yajuj and Majuj from the Quran. So let's start. Let's examine Surah Al-Kahf, and the specific ayat we'll be looking at are 83 to 98. So in Surah Al-Kahf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the story of Zul-Qarnain. Who is Zul-Qarnain? Zul-Qarnain is a man who travels throughout the land, and he brings peace and justice to the people he meets by the command of Allah. He is a servant of Allah. He is a righteous person. In Surah Al-Kahf, we are told that Zul-Qarnain makes 3 different journeys, and he encounters 3 unique groups of people, one group on each of the 3 journeys. And the third journey and the third group of people relate to Yajuj and Majuj. So let's start by analyzing the first journey of Zul-Qarnain, which we can see in the ayat 83 to 88. And for the purpose of this analysis, I will focus my attention on the English translation. So let's read what is said. Let's go through this line by line. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins and says, they ask you about Zul-Qarnain. Say, I will relate to you something of his narrative. Say that I will tell you something about his story. Surely we established him in the land and gave him the means to all things. So he traveled a course. So Zul-Qarnain went on a journey until he reached the setting point of the sun, which appeared to him to be setting in a spring of murky water, where he found some people. We said, O Zul-Qarnain, either punish them or treat them kindly. He responded, whoever does wrong will be punished by us, then will be returned to their Lord, who will punish them with a horrible torment. As for those who believe and do good, they will have the finest reward, and we will assign them easy commands. That is what we are told about the first journey of Zul-Qarnain. And there are a couple of essential facts that we can ascertain from the first journey of Zul-Qarnain. Number 1 is he traveled west. He traveled in the direction of the setting of the sun, that is, in a westward direction. So he's traveling due west. Now, there's a specific phrase in this ayat, which is the key, which will unlock where Zul-Qarnain traveled to in his first journey, and that phrase is right here. Aynan Hamiya. Aynan Hamiya. And let's see how various translators have chosen to translate the phrase Aynan Hamiya. Sahih International say that it is a spring of dark mud. Pickthall says muddy spring. Yusuf Ali says spring of murky water. Shakir says a black sea. Very interesting. Muhammad Sarwar says warm source spring of water. Mohsen Khan says black, muddy or hot water. And Arbri says a muddy spring. So Zul-Qarnain traveled west to a place where he saw the sun setting as if it was setting over a black sea with muddy water. So we must ask ourselves the question, what could this place be? And it just so happens that there is in fact a very famous, well-known body of water called the Black Sea. That is the name of this place. It's right here. It's north of Turkey, south of Ukraine, and parts of Russia. It's called the Black Sea. And why is it called the Black Sea? because the water is very dark. This is a satellite image of the Black Sea. You can see that the water has a very dark color. It's different from the water here, which is more of a greenish, bluish color. This is very, very dark. The water, this is an actual picture of the Black Sea. You can see it's very muddy, murky looking water. It's very dark, brown, black colored water. And this exactly fits the description which we are told of in the Quran, that he traveled to a place westward and he came across the sun setting over a Black Sea. So we can be quite confident that Zul-Qarnain traveled due west towards the Black Sea. That's the first journey. And then he encountered people. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked him, what should he do? Will he punish them? And so on and so forth. But the important point here is where he went on the first journey, because it helps us locate where Zul-Qarnain is and where he's traveling. Let's examine now the second journey. So he went to the Black Sea. What are we told then? We are told that then he traveled a different course. He went on another journey in a different direction until he reached the rising point of the sun. So he went east, because the sun rises in the east. He found the sun rising on a people for whom we had provided no shelter from it. So it was, and we truly had full knowledge of him. So we're told very little about this journey. We're just told that it's a different direction from the first journey, and then we're told that it is eastward, direction of the rising of the sun, and that by traveling east, he reached a place, Zul-Qarnain went to a place where he met a people who had no shade or shelter from the sun. So we must ask ourselves the question, is there such a place? East. So if you go west towards the Black Sea, you go east, where do you end up? Well, you end up in Turkmenistan. Zul-Qarnain could have crossed the Caspian Sea here, could have gone in a straight line, or he could have gone around it. But the direction of travel is east. And why Turkmenistan? Because if you look here, Black Sea, Caspian Sea, here in Turkmenistan is a very, very interesting place that we must examine in more detail, called the Karakoram Desert in Turkmenistan. This is a satellite image of the Karakoram Desert. There are no mountains in the Karakoram Desert. There are no rivers. There are no bodies of water. There is no greenery. See, here on the side there's greenery. Here there's a lake. But in the Karakoram Desert, there's just sand as far as the eye can see. Not a place for you to find shade from the sun or shelter from it. So he went due west on the first journey to the Black Sea. Then he went east to the Karakoram Desert. And now we arrive at the third journey of Zul-Qarnain. So then he traveled a third course until he reached a pass between two mountains. He found in front of them a people who could hardly understand his language. They pleaded, "O Zul-Qarnain, surely Gog and Magog are spreading corruption throughout the land. Should we pay you tribute provided that you build a wall between us and them?" He responded, "What my Lord has provided for me is far better, but assist me with resources and I will build a barrier between you and them. Bring me blocks of iron." Then when he had filled up the gap between the two mountains, he ordered, "Blow." When the iron became red hot, he said, "Bring me molten copper to pour over it." And so the enemies could neither scale nor tunnel through it. He declared, "This is a mercy from my Lord, but when the promise of my Lord comes to pass, he will level it to the ground, and my Lord's promise is ever true." So there's a lot to unpack here. Many things that we must consider. Number one, which direction is the third journey in? We know that it's a different direction from the first two, which were east and west. So this journey must be either northward or southward. So he either went north or he went south. That's the first fact. Number two, he reached a pass between two mountains. So he must be in a mountainous region. He's not in outer space. He's not underground, he's not in the ocean, he's on land in a mountainous region. The people there were isolated. So they were an isolated people. They had trouble communicating with Zul-Qarnain, but they were able to tell him that Yajuj and Majuj were spreading corruption throughout the land, and they asked him for help. They said, build us a barrier between ourselves and Yajuj and Majuj. And I want you to understand something. They are on one side of the mountain pass. Yajuj and Majuj are on the other side. They said, build us a barrier. Block off the passage. One wall. Make a wall. Just a single barrier so they cannot come and harm us. Okay? And so Zul-Qarnain built a wall made of iron and molten copper, which served what purpose? It blocked the mountain passage being used by Yajuj and Majuj. Now there's one more thing that we can ascertain from this ayat, and that is that the passage must be very steep and narrow. How do we know this? Well, if you go back to the ayat, the people say to him that should we pay you some money so that you build a wall between us and them? And Zul-Qarnain says, what Allah has given to me, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to me is far better, but assist me with resources. Help me with your resources, help me with your effort. I will build a barrier between you and them. And then they gave him blocks of iron, then they gave him molten copper. So they helped him with their effort, they helped him with whatever resources they had. But they were an isolated people. They didn't have an empire, they didn't have industry, they had simple things. So we're not talking about a massive civilization that wanted Zul-Qarnain's help. We're talking about a tribe of isolated people that were being attacked by Yajuj and Majuj, and they asked Zul-Qarnain for help. So this wall is not going to span thousands of kilometers. It's a small wall in a narrow pass between two mountains. So now let's take a look at the satellite imagery of this region. Here on the left is the Black Sea. This is the Caspian Sea. And over here is the Karakoram Desert. So Zul-Qarnain went due west to the Black Sea. He then went east to the Karakoram Desert, and he's exploring this region. If you notice here on the map, there is a mountain range. And in fact, it looks like there are two parts to this mountain range. And this mountain range is called the Greater Caucasus Mountains. And if you notice that from sea level, the Greater Caucasus Mountains actually reach something around 4,000 meters of elevation. So it's a very, very sudden rise from sea level to the top of these mountains. This is what the Greater Caucasus Mountains look like. It's quite awe-inspiring when you look at them. A very, very treacherous, difficult landscape. I think it's pretty much impossible for someone to try and cross these mountains on foot or even with a horse, with other people, because one wrong move and you just fall to your death. And if you notice here, in the Greater Caucasus Mountains, you'll notice that there's a river that flows from north to south. It flows through the mountains, and this river actually has cut a natural passage through this mountain range called the Darial Pass. And this is a mountain pass that's been used for many, many centuries. And here it says it's the Georgian military road. It's a very important pass because it means you can cut through the mountains and have safe passage. So Zul-Qarnain went west to the Black Sea, east to the Karakoram Desert, and then he traveled north until he came upon the Darial Pass in the Great Caucasus Mountains. And I found this picture, and I thought it was really interesting because this picture reminds me a lot of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us in the Quran, of a people on the south side of the mountain seeking refuge from Yajuj and Majuj who would cross the Greater Caucasus Mountains and spread corruption throughout the land. This is a modern picture, of course, but it just reminded me of the scene. The environment seems to match the setting place of what we are told in the Quran. This is an actual picture of the Darial Pass. This is in the summertime, so there's no snow. And you might say to yourself, this is quite a wide and open area. It doesn't seem like a very difficult thing to go around this. We're told that Yajuj and Majuj could not tunnel through the wall and they could not scale the wall. So how does that make sense here? Well, I want to draw your attention to the fact that there's a river that goes through the Darial Pass, and this is the riverbed. And you will remember from geography that rivers erode rock over time. So over time, this mountain pass has become wider and wider and wider. And if you look at older artistic sketches of the Darial Pass, you see a very different picture. Here's the same river, and that's a narrow passageway going through these very steep mountainous cliffs. There you can see some horsemen making their way through this pass. So it was much, much narrower in the past. So we can establish from the Quran, using our best efforts, that Zul-Qarnain traveled to the Black Sea first, then to the Karakoram Desert, then to the Darial Gorge and the Great Caucasus Mountains, and it is there that he built a barrier to block off the mountain passage used by Yajuj and Majuj to cross the mountains. Now, when people hear this story from the Quran, for some reason in their mind's eye, in their imagination, they think that Zul-Qarnain entrapped Yajuj and Majuj, that he somehow trapped them, that they were completely enclosed by this barrier. But that is simply not the case. The Yajuj and Majuj were not trapped because Zul-Qarnain built a wall. There were people on the south of the mountain face seeking his help. Yajuj and Majuj were in the north. They would travel from north to south through the Darial Pass, and Zul-Qarnain built a wall, one wall, blocking the passage so they could not go south and attack these people. He didn't build 2 walls or 4 walls. He didn't trap them in a cave. The ayat is called Surah Al-Kahf. We are told about a story of the people of the cave. If Allah wanted to talk about a cave, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would just say that Yajuj and Majuj were trapped in a cave. But no, that's not what happened. They were in the north, and Zul-Qarnain blocked their passageway to come south. This has a very, very critical and important implication. And just imagine this, as a thought experiment, that you're walking down a footpath and you come across a wall that blocks your path. Are you trapped for the rest of eternity? No, because you can go back from where you came from. In the same way, Yajuj and Majuj were prevented from traveling south across the mountains, but they could go west or east or north. They were never entrapped. They were simply blocked off. And we're told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that one day, when Allah's promise comes to pass, this wall will be leveled to the ground. It will be completely destroyed. Not partially destroyed, but completely destroyed. And you will have no remnants of this wall. And when is this? This is sometime in the future, after it was built. So after the time of Zul-Qarnain, at some point in the future, it will be destroyed.